Thank you so much, everyone, for coming today. The City Council approved yesterday two measures to go onto the ballot regarding short-term rentals. So we have a few people here to speak on that this morning. First, you'll hear from Mayor Quinton Lucas, Councilman, 1st District at-large Councilman Kevin O'Neill, 4th District Councilman Eric Bunch, our City Auditor Doug Jones, Andrea O'Hara, the Executive Director of the Hotel and Lodging Association of the Greater Kansas City Area, and Tiffany Moore, the Director of the Kansas City Neighborhood Advisory Council in the 6th District. So I'd like to introduce the Mayor of Kansas City, Quinton Lucas.
Well, good morning. It is an honor to be with you. We'll also look forward to questions at the end on this or any other topics you might have. I am very proud that this week your city government, city council, mayor's office, and others decided to act. And to act to make sure we have two very important things: fairness and enforcement for our neighborhoods. On the fairness side, for years and years in our city, we've had Airbnbs, short-term rentals, and others who've been operating outside of many of our rules. Hotels and motels pay fees, pay taxes, make sure they're contributing back to our city. In too many cases, our short-term rentals have not. So thanks to some research that was done by our city auditor, Doug Jones, and we thank him for it, and thanks largely to people like Tiffany Moore and others in our neighborhoods who have said, what can we do to make things fairer? We're proposing for the springtime ballot two different issues, one of which relates to making sure that short-term rentals, your Airbnbs, your VRBOs, actually pay fees like hotels and motels do in our city. I know a lot of people sometimes try to say that short-term rentals or Airbnbs are just somebody who's renting off an extra room or perhaps a carriage house. However, in reality, there are a lot of folks in Kansas City that own 40, 80, 120 different single-family homes that are being used as short-term rentals. They are operating like hotels. They're operating as substitutes for hotels and motels. We thought it was important, working with so many of our partners in the lodging industry, to make sure that we address that fairness and inequity long-term. The other looks to make sure that we are actually increasing a fee that has not been increased since 2004, to make sure that Kansas City can not only fund convention and tourism as we look at items like a World Cup coming up, the NFL draft, but also to make sure that we're giving general fund relief so that we have money for enforcement for short-term rentals in neighborhoods like this one, to make sure that we're keeping up with so many of the issues that we've heard over time. I'll turn it over to Councilman O'Neill in a second, but what we've heard from a lot of different neighborhoods is parties that happen in so many neighborhoods. We've heard about the fact that there are a number of different people that are creating issues and concerns, including more trash in more Kansas City neighborhoods, and we wanted to just make sure that we were addressing that issue fundamentally. No longer should it be that people have to deal with issues relating to Airbnbs and get no answer from City Hall. With the steps you're seeing taken today, we'll make sure we have a better regulatory apparatus, we'll make sure that we have revenues to address these long-term concerns, and more than anything, we will make sure that Kansas City can deliver on the basic services necessary, ensuring that as we look at big events, like the NFL draft, like the World Cup, we're also taking care of everyday neighborhood concerns. So with that, we look forward to sharing the story with you over the next several months of why this is important. We look forward to sharing how we'll continue to stand up for Kansas City neighborhoods, and we look forward to sharing how, at the city council and local government level, we continue to get things done each and every day for the best interest of the people of Kansas City. With that, I'll turn it over to Councilman Kevin O'Neill of the 1st District at large. And, you know, his station didn't hear me at all, but it's all good.
No, you got it. You got it.
Thank you. I'll be short. I think this is important for two reasons. Number one, the hotels in our city have been burdened by the short-term rentals for many years, and it's an unfair playing field. And I think we leveled the playing field today. That's really important. The second thing is when I go to neighborhood meetings, one of the top priorities for the neighborhoods is how do we get rid of these short-term rentals. They bring in lots of noise, they bring in lots of parties, and I think this is just the first step. I think we have a lot of things. I think we have too much density. In some neighborhoods, you can find 7 or 8 short-term rentals in the same block. We have to look at that, and so the next step will be making processes that make it easier to identify these houses and to get more stringent rules enforced on them. So, thank you. Now I'd like to introduce our Kansas City Auditor, Doug Jones.
Thank you, Councilman O'Neill. The City Auditor's Office recently issued 2 audits on short-term rentals, and I've had some brief comments about those audits, just the results of those. For the first audit, we concluded short-term rentals are a significant part of the accommodation industry in Kansas City, Missouri, roughly the equivalent of 2 downtown convention hotels. And they are not currently required to pay the convention tourism taxes typically paid by most hotels and hotels in the city. We made recommendations to the mayor and the city council to take steps so that these convention and tourism taxes and fees are applied uniformly to short-term rentals, hotels, and motels. If these short-term rentals pay the same taxes and fees, it levels the playing field in Kansas City. Doing this also could bring in about $13 million in additional revenue over the next 5 years for the city's tourism-related activities. Recent actions by the mayor and council, last month's adoption of the city's legislative priorities, and yesterday's passage of the 2 ordinances to ask voters to approve taxes for short-term rentals have implemented our recommendations. Actually, this is like the quickest I've seen recommendations ever implemented. Our second audit, we concluded a few short-term rental hosts are actually complying with city's permit requirements. Since 2018, we estimate only about 7% of short-term rental hosts have gotten a permit. This has resulted in a loss of about $1.1 million in permit revenues, and that's revenue that would have paid for enforcement and management activities. We found that city's existing regulations does not provide management with the tools that they need to effectively enforce the requirements. Compared to other cities, Kansas City's regulations do not clearly require hosts to obtain permits before listing on the platforms, and they don't require the platforms to check for a permit before they allow somebody to list. So getting these unpermitted short-term rental units permitted, that's an important step. We need to do that to create an effective permitting system. We made recommendations to improve short-term rental permit compliance through changes in the city's regulations and improvements to how the city's communicating with the platforms. If the compliance improves, we estimate financial impact about $1.1 million over the next 5 years through permit fees. Effective enforcement starts with permits. All subsequent enforcement actions related to operations and nuisance flow from short-term rental units having a permit. Implementing our recommendations can help the city provide resources to fund enforcement efforts, as well as information about short-term rental owners and relationships with the booking platforms that will also help supplement those enforcement actions on nuisance properties. A few final notes. I want to thank the audit staff for the excellent work they did on the project. I want to thank the city's law department and the city planning and development department for their assistance. And lastly, I want to thank the public, because this audit was based in part on the suggestion that they sent to us. And with that, I'll turn it over to Andrea O'Hara, the Executive Director of the Hotel and Lodging Association.
Thank you so much.
Good morning. On behalf of the hotel community, I'd like to thank the mayor, Councilmember O'Neill, Councilmember Bunch, and the other committee members that chose to make short-term rentals a top priority and recognized that there was an opportunity to level the playing field for our hotels. We'd also like to thank them for keeping in mind Visit KC and allocating a portion of these new funds to Visit KC to help them promote the destination as a convention and visitors' place to be. As a hotel community, our priority has been to ensure that these short-term rentals pay the same taxes and the same fees that our guest rooms are held to. And so while we don't feel it's our position to dictate what a resident can do with their property, as homeowners, we do understand the concerns and the challenges that it can create for a neighborhood. And so we feel this step to implement the new sales or the new tax, the new fee, is a great step in the right direction for both parties, both the hotel and the residents. We're looking forward to April, and we hope that the community will come out and vote in support of these 2 initiatives. And keeping in mind that this tax and this fee is paid by the visitor. It's not paid by the resident. And it gives us the opportunity to reinvest these funds into Kansas City and make this a great place to live. So thank you. And with that, I'll introduce Tiffany Moore with the Kansas City Neighborhood Advisory Council.
Good morning. I want to start by thanking the mayor for including the neighborhood voice today and in the conversation around short-term rentals. The same is true of council. They've been very open to hearing what the people that live in Kansas City have to say on this topic, and that's extremely important to us. As was just introduced, I am the 6th District representative of the Neighborhood Advisory Council. We represent the interests of neighborhoods, which include condos, apartments, and single-family home communities. We're encouraged by the steps that the mayor, council, and staff have begun to take in closing the gaps on our short-term rental policy. But this is just the beginning, and there's a lot more work to be done. We look forward to working together on a strong short-term rental policy that protects our vibrant, unique neighborhoods, because neighborhoods are where Kansas City lives. Thank you.
Councilman Bunch?
Hi, thanks everyone for being here, and I want to thank my colleagues for supporting this effort yesterday in City Council. And I want to remind everyone in the community, especially the 4th District, as the 4th District City Council representative, that where a lot of our biggest headaches and challenges and opportunities are really coming from in regards to short-term rentals. I want to remind everyone that this is just one of many steps that we're going to be taking to not only make sure that short-term rentals are on the same level playing field as the rest of our lodging opportunities in terms of taxes and fees, but also that we're going to do a much better job of enforcing the ordinances that we have on the books and addressing the nearly 2,000 unlicensed short-term rentals that exist in the city. This is not the only part that we're doing today. What we're talking about today and what we addressed yesterday in City Council is just one of the many steps, and I'm excited to put this on the ballot for voters to decide to make sure that we have revenue coming back into the city to help manage and maintain our tourism opportunities and our facilities. But again, look for more action from us, the City Council, on this very important issue. And I'll say that it is really important for a variety of reasons. I've heard from the community on short-term rentals, both good and bad, but we've heard that number one, it's very difficult to get a house these days. It's difficult to buy a house. It's difficult to find affordable housing to rent. So number one is affordable housing and continue that as a priority of this City Council in this city. Two is that we have so many of them that have become nuisances, the short-term rentals. Many are operating just fine and are great. However, we're seeing a lot more nuisance activity, and so we want to be able to enforce that. And so look for more efforts to come on that. And then lastly, I mentioned just a second ago that we have nearly 2,000 unlicensed short-term rentals, and that is akin to having a hotelier that is operating without any sort of regulation. We want to make sure that we're addressing that as well. So more to come, but this is a really exciting first step, and hopeful that and very optimistic the voters will agree and show up in mass in April to vote affirmatively for this. So thanks everyone for being here, and thanks everyone behind me for this. I also want to give a special shout out to our auditor Doug Jones, who really, he and his team led the effort to analyze what policy issues were missing. This was step one. The unlevel playing field that we see was step one. You may have recalled that there was a second audit out there that addressed some of the other policy issues. So we're going to be on to that next. So thanks everyone for being here, and have a great weekend.
Questions?
Mayor, I just wanted to clarify the extra fees would be paid by visitors, not residents.
That's correct. So on both of the tax proposals, extra fees are paid by visitors to Kansas City, unless, of course, you're a Kansas Citian who's staying in a short-term rental or a hotel. But this is something that's a user fee fundamentally, very different than some of the other discussions we've had on property and sales taxes.
Why are we here, Mayor? I mean, is this a hot
Yeah.
spot?
Yeah, I think part of our discussion, and Ms. Moore noted that, is how this is having that sort of impact in our residential neighborhoods. Imagine if we just put two 20-story convention hotels right here in Brookside. That is what we're seeing happen more and more in our Kansas City neighborhoods. And so we thought it was important to come to neighborhoods, single-family residential areas, to show where the impact has been and, frankly, how troubling it can be to a neighborhood to have house parties. Councilman O'Neill mentioned the density that you have sometimes. 4 or 5 Airbnbs operating on the same block in some situations. That's the sort of thing that we have a concern on, that we want to mitigate against, and why we think it was important to take these first steps, recognizing that there will be more along the way.
I guess what I'm asking is, some neighborhoods more affected than others. I mean, is this here or Westport or Plaza or Northland?
You know, there was a lot of discussion, and Ms. Moore can help me with this too, when we first came up actually with the proposals for regulation of Airbnbs, that they would have a disproportionate impact. I won't get into the zoning, but it's R75, I believe, but people correct me. But nonetheless, certain single-family neighborhoods having that impact because they're not actually built up to actually have the amount of traffic, the number of people coming through, even trash disposal in the same ways. And so that is why we actually look at the impact core to some neighborhoods. That said, it's an issue citywide. We're not doing enough registration or enforcement in all parts of the city. So this is at least a step for us to say not only in residential neighborhoods, but throughout the city we'll start to address the concern. Ms. Moore, I don't know if you have something to add.
Sure. I can speak to the fact that some neighborhoods in the city are more impacted. They tend to be within walkable distances to some of our entertainment districts and other spaces. Kate Barsati, who is the 4th District representative on KCMO.gov, is from Columbus Park. They are very heavily impacted. The West Plaza area is another area that's quite heavily impacted. And so that's what we're looking at, is how do we make sure that particularly neighborhoods that are within walkable distances to tourist destinations aren't impacted to the extent that there is not housing available for folks who want to live in Kansas City.
Mayor, some people against this tax on short-term rentals would say the tax can only be applied on hotels and not residence homes. How would the city plan to defend this statement?
So I guess the question relates to a question on the legality, fundamentally, of the tax itself. We've had this vetted by our city attorney's office. We believe that this is an absolutely valid imposition of tax. And really think about the common sense of it. We have Airbnb owners that own 40, 80, 120 of these units, often single-family units, throughout the city of Kansas City. The state legislation was never intended to allow basically hotels and motels to operate fundamentally differently from other hotels and motels. This is a complete substitute in many ways for regular lodging. That's why I think a lot of our lodging interests in Kansas City have said, we're not necessarily against them. We just want it to be fair. If thousands of people, let's say during an NFL draft weekend or a future World Cup, will be staying in short-term rentals, why is it that hotels and motels should be the only ones that are helping to support and finance our convention and tourism efforts, our marketing efforts through Visit KC, and fundamentally helping to address some of the public safety costs and beyond that we have arising out of these sorts of things? For us, it is fairness. It's our belief that any court will find that the same way, but we have had our law department evaluated, and we're confident it will stand up to any legal challenge.
City council members, you should have received an email or letter yesterday from some residents asking for a moratorium on short-term rentals until you can get all these things figured out. How likely are you all to issue a moratorium?
You know, I'll let, I know Councilman Bunch has done a good amount of work with that. I'll let him speak to it if you'd like.
There's a spot there for my coffee. That's great. Yeah, I'm in support of a moratorium. I think that the question is how do we like actually implement that, and then what effect does it actually have? And I know that in conversations with KCMO.gov, the KC Neighborhood Advisory Council, their recommendation has indeed been a moratorium, and the reason being the fear of perhaps some of these who are unlicensed right now there may be a rush to get licensed, which of course we want everyone who's operating to be licensed, but also we don't want to let folks who've been doing this illegally off the hook. I don't know that a moratorium totally solves that, but what I think a moratorium does do is it sends a message that we need to pump the brakes on this program to just a little bit to ensure that we can get our ducks in a row to ensure that the policy is right. Another thing is I think that the concern for me with the potential for an onslaught of new licensed that had been previously operating illegally, I don't want those folks to end up getting sort of grandfathered into a new program. So that is a bit of a concern. So I think I'm supportive of a moratorium, and we actually put that into our resolution that was adopted prior to the holiday break, calling on the city manager to evaluate the movement of the enforcement component of this away from the planning department into the neighborhood services department, but also evaluating how we would actually make a moratorium happen. I would maybe, if Ms. Moore from the KCNAC has more to say on the moratorium, she may have an answer to that as well. But for me, I'm supportive. I think we just need to get the legislation put together.
It's not off the table.
For me, it's not. I would be remiss if I didn't have further conversation with my colleagues about it, though. But we have had some of that conversation, and I think there is support, but there certainly is support for me.
Thank you. So I would echo what Councilman Bunch just said, but also another priority that KCNAC considered in requesting the moratorium was to shift as many resources, both staffing and financially, to the existing participants in this program. Adding additional units into a program that is currently overtaxing some neighborhoods that are doing some of this at the grassroots level would better help us rein in some of the challenges that those most densely impacted neighborhoods would have without adding to it, while we take the time to update and modernize the short-term rental program holistically. Thank you.
And
Hi, I'm back. Hi, everyone. One last thing I want to add about on that that is, I think, maybe missing, and perhaps someone will ask this question, but I'll go ahead and pretend that it was asked. But one of the biggest challenges we have in the unlicensed part of this, where we're talking about, like I said, 2,000, 1,800 or so. Mr. Jones could give us a more accurate estimate with a little bit better precision. But the biggest challenge we have is that currently under current code, it is not illegal. It's not clearly stated that it is illegal for you to list your unit on Airbnb or Vrbo or any of the others, any of the platforms. It's not illegal for you to do that without a license. So that is something that absolutely has to change in our municipal code. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult for us to go after them with any sort of regularity without like deep investigations. We need to be able to just look at a screenshot of a listing on Airbnb and say, no, this person is. So we need to change that in our code. Many cities are already doing that. That was pointed out in the audit. The other thing that the audit pointed out, this is the second audit, not the financial one, but the second audit. Another thing that pointed out was that oftentimes those intermediaries, those third parties, are willing to work with cities who have that in place because it's clear, it is a clear violation if they are listing, and then I think that gives us a much better opportunity to delist those. So in terms of resources and going after those who are unlicensed, a moratorium gives us that ability to shift that over, and so I just wanted to add that piece of context as well. So something else that has got to be on the way and will be on the way.
And that wouldn't require a citywide vote. That'd be more of a council.
Correct. That's just an ordinance change. It would just be a vote of 7 of the city council.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.